Howdy, this is Dr. Kamazinski here at Hokkaido University of Education in Asahikawa. So for the last flip, we looked at a few basic ideas. We'll repeat them. You can keep them in memory. One of those ideas is that when we are thinking, an argument for us is a series of statements that support or prove a conclusion. And each statement is something that is either true or false. So I repeat that. A statement is something that is either true or false, and an argument is a series of statements designed to support one statement that we call the conclusion. There are two important rules that we looked at. One is probably the absolute most important rule when you are looking at arguments. And that is, when you're looking at arguments, find the premises and the conclusion. Or to put it another way, we want to know the structure of the argument that we're looking at, and in the natural order. So instead of doing premise, conclusion, premise, do either premise, premise, conclusion, or conclusion, premise, premise. The goal is that we don't want it to be hard for our reader to understand our argument, and good authors follow ideas today. So I will show you a few terms, and please pause the screen at these terms and look up what they mean. So these are some of the key terms for this section: reliable, consistent, concrete, emotional, biased, loaded, and logical. So some of these words should already be familiar. Some of them are words you may not see often. And the last word, logical, has many definitions. And part of what we are learning in this class is what qualifies as logical thinking. So in this week's flip, we're going to look at 4 more rules that you could find in Weston's book. We're going to look at how to start from reliable premises, how to be concrete and concise, how to argue based on logic, not loaded language, and how to use consistent terms. So Weston, for the 5th one, says use substance, not overtone. That's a little bit hard to understand. But the idea that we have for the 5th one is make the argument strong based on the logic, not on words we pick. So we'll see all of this as we move forward. So rule 3, start from reliable premises. Now, in this case, the challenge is that when we make an argument is the premises that we have to work with. So I repeat that. An argument is only as good as the premises that we have to work with. So a good argument leads you from premises you accept to a conclusion you do not yet believe. So the point of arguments is to help us to see things we wouldn't otherwise see. But this means we need to already believe the premises. So let me give you an example. So let's say that there is a moon kingdom. 2. There is a princess living in the moon. Therefore, you should spend more time on your homework. This argument is bad because it misunderstands that we want to start from reliable premises, premises we can believe. So let's go back. So here's an example. Hokkaido is in America. Everyone in America speaks English. Therefore, everyone in Hokkaido speaks English. Now, the premise Hokkaido is in America is not reliable because it's not true. Thus, we did not believe the conclusion of the argument. So because this argument starts with a bad premise, we don't believe the argument. I'll give a couple more examples. Aiko says that all Canadians are mean. Aiko just broke up with her Canadian boyfriend. She says he never treated her well and he never gave her flowers. So to say it another way, Aiko was dating someone from Canada. Then they broke up. They are not together. Zekosta. She says all Canadians are mean. In this case, Aiko's evidence is weak. It's all about Aiko and what happened to her. Thus, we do not believe the conclusion of the argument. Because everything is just what happened to Aiko, there's no strong reason to think Canadians are mean. Number 3. Jane, I know my body. I feel better when I take allergy medicine. Therefore, I don't have stomach cancer. Here we should ask ourselves one question. Is Jane a doctor? No. So this is not reliable. Jane doesn't know how to tell if she has stomach cancer. Therefore, we do not believe the conclusion of this argument. Rule 4. Be concrete and concise. Avoid abstract, vague, and general terms. So by concrete, we don't mean the things that roads are made out of. And by concise, we mean short, but not too short. So the goal is make your argument work. State it clearly so people can understand it and can apply it easily. I'll give a couple of examples. For all intents and purposes, the reason Mr. Henderson arrived late for work was due to the fact that he stopped at very many traffic lights that were red in color. So that's a very long sentence. It's not saying very much. Mr. Henderson was late because he had to stop at many red lights. So this is not very concise in the first version. Another example, smoking tobacco can cause humans to suffer unnecessary consequences. Again, these are big words. Smoking causes lung damage. Probably just as good and clearer. The existence of computers and computer technology has greatly influenced commercial enterprise and information exchange. Computers have helped business and communication. So in all of these, just say more clearly what you want to say. The complexity doesn't help anyone. Say only what you need for your argument. So, let me give an example. Mrs. Adams, aged 40, is a computer programmer who works at Microsoft and an expert in Shodo. And she says Heather's handwriting is very good. Heather is always praised by her Shodo teacher. Therefore, Heather is good at Shodo. Now this argument is fine. So many of the arguments we looked at today are weak. But this argument could be shorter and better in that way. So if we just change it to this. Mrs. Adams, an expert in Shodo, says Heather's handwriting is very good. Heather is always praised by her Shodo teacher. Therefore, Heather is good at Shodo. If we change it in this way, the argument is stronger. Rule 5. Argue based on logic, not loaded language. In this context, loaded means ura no imi aru. Or we could say in English, there's a second meaning. There's something we've added to what we're saying. So let's say this. There is a terrible American. Since he is terrible, he probably committed the crime. Now, if we just take out the word terrible, the argument gets weaker. There is an American, thus he probably committed the crime. So that sounds very weak. So this is a hint that one of the adjectives you're using is poor. It doesn't help your argument. It's cheating to try to make the argument work. So here's a list of some of the adjectives that might signal that you're using loaded language. Despicable, disgusting, horrifying, abusive, lovely, delightful, dignified, honorable, scary, terrible, wonderful, important. All of these adjectives have fine uses in other places, and maybe they can show up in arguments in other ways, but if they replace an argument, this is bad. So in our example above, terrible is replacing any evidence. There's no evidence in the argument there is a terrible American. Since he is terrible, he probably committed the crime. There's nothing to support that conclusion except the word terrible. In this case, we shouldn't use this type of word. Another way to do the same thing is what are called biased terms. Henkenshita mono. So this is something like this. Alex is a scumbag. A scumbag like Alex cannot be trusted. Consequently, Alex is the murderer. So here's another example. So here's another example. Alex is a scumbag like Alex cannot be trusted. Consequently, Alex is the murderer. Second example. Are you going to listen to a quack like Kazuya or Dr. Kamazinski? Kazuya thinks you should pay your rent. Therefore, you should not pay your rent. So let's look at each of these. So in the first argument, we're told Alex is a scumbag, and you can't trust scumbags. Fair enough. But being a scumbag doesn't make someone a murderer. So the argument is weak because scumbag is a biased term. In the second argument, we are calling Kazuya a quack, a giisha. And then we're saying Kazuya thinks you should pay your rent. And we're concluding the opposite. We're saying you should not pay your rent. The only argument we have is that Kazuya is a quack. But there's no good reason to think a quack doesn't know that you should pay your rent. So our argument would be better if we just left that out. But that would break what they're trying to say. Rule 6. Use consistent terms. Every time you want to say something, use the same word for the same meaning. Now, I'm putting a note here, especially for short essays and arguments. For longer essays, you might want to vary minor terms to keep your reader interested. And by longer essays, I mean something like 10 pages or so. If it is shorter, please use the same term in the same way. So use the same word to say the same thing. So I'll give a type of example. Do not do this. If you want to be a teacher, then you should go to Hokkaido University of Education, Asahikawa. One wants to be an educator. Thus, you should go to Kyodai. So this is confusing. There's a lot of terms that could be the same. So I put some of them in bold, and I underline some of them. So teacher and educator, same meaning. Hokkaido University of Education, Asahikawa, and Kyodai, same meaning. We're using you and one with the same meaning. Instead, do this. If you want to be a teacher, then you should go to Hokkaido University of Education, Asahikawa. You want to be a teacher, thus you should go to Hokkaido University of Education, Asahikawa. In this case, it's much easier to understand because the terms are the same. Give you a second example. Janice does not believe she has cancer. Ms. Smith thinks that the allergy medicine she takes is curing her tumors. Sally's aunt is really dying, but she doesn't understand that the cancer cells are spreading. The metastasized cancer will probably prove mortal. So, I don't understand what this means, and I'm a native English speaker. But we can make this a lot easier if we make some of the terms the same. So if Janice is Mrs. Smith, is Sally's aunt, let's just call her Janice throughout. So we have the words cancer, tumor, cancer cell. So cancer is, of course, gan. Tumor is dekimono. Cancer cells, gan no saibou. All of this is the same. We don't need all of this. Also, we have spreading and metastasized. Now, metastasized is a big word, but it means the same thing as spreading. So there's no reason to use it. So let me reread this paragraph. Simplified. Janice does not believe she has cancer. Janice thinks allergy medicine is curing her cancer. Janice is dying. So it's not a great argument, but it's much easier to understand in the second version.